What's up, guys? Today I am joined by Michael Moreci. He is a comic book writer who's written for Superman, The Flash, Nightwing, and much more. But in Star Wars, he's had 11 released issues of Star Wars Adventures, and he's doing the upcoming Clone Wars Battle Tales that's going to start on April 1st. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I am doing good. How are you doing?
I think as good as we all can be.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's about it.
Yeah. uh,
We're all adjusting.
well, I want to get right into your newest project, the Clone Wars Battle Tales. What can you tell us about this project? Just the basic premise of the series.
Yeah, so the basic premise is this. It's 5 issues long. It's coming out every April's one of those weird months that has 5 Wednesdays. And each story is going to be some kind of war battle story told from one of the clones' perspectives. If you're familiar with the series that Kevin Scott wrote, the great series that he wrote, Vader's Castle. There's been two of them now. Um, it's formatted the exact same way, where there's like a 3 page intro that tells the story like in real time, in a sense, in current time, and that segues into somebody ostensibly like telling a story of like, oh, remember when that thing happened, and then the bulk of the issue is the story of that thing that happened. So here it'll be the clones are in a situation for the first 3 pages, and then for example, Commander Wolf will say, "Oh, this is like that time," and then we'll see what that time was. So it's 5 issues. You'll see guys like Wolf, Rex, Cody, Anakin, all sorts of favorites from the Clone Wars series.
That's funny. I was going to ask if it was anything like Tales from Vader Castle, which I think has some very great storytelling in it. Uh, it has a bit of a tall tale aspect to it, I think, where there's some unreliable narration going on. Is there going to be any of that? Will one of the clones say something that's just like so out there that kind of leaves it up to the imagination of whether it's real or not?
You know what? That's funny. That's a really great question because that's something that I considered. Like, I was like, should we do an issue that's like really out there? But I feel like Cavan had such a great setup or situation, I guess, with his characters, or kind of like these ragtag, the crew that he's put, the people who frame those stories, and they are so perfect for telling tall tales. And the clones, I felt like, are not necessarily. They're so more, they're military. They're very orderly military rules, regulations, stuff like that. So I found it hard to try to find a clone that would tell a story that wasn't entirely accurate.
It,
I wanted to, but I don't know. It just didn't feel like it worked.
the only one I can think of is maybe Gregor after he's gone a little crazy. But that's a Star Wars
I,
Rebels tale, so
I know. It's funny. I tried. So these stories actually take place early in the series, in the animated series, and I tried really hard to get Gregor in there, and I couldn't do it. They wouldn't let me.
well, when you're writing all these different clones, how is it to write them so that they're at least a little bit different? Because they all have slightly, uh, slight variations to them, and like D. Bradley Baker has definitely given them all different characteristics. What's it like to write that?
That was one of the biggest challenges for sure, because you're totally right. Like, they all have their certain ticks and their personalities that evolve, that we see evolve, profoundly from the beginning of the series all the way, if you want to even say all the way to Rebels. Um, and what's really interesting is seeing, like, something that I guess I took for granted was like seeing how the clones character, like their personalities, evolved alongside their Jedi counterpart.
Hmm.
Because Cody's way more kind of by the book and stricter, and then like Rex, and obviously Rex is more with Anakin, so there's a lot more freewheeling going on there. Where Cody's with Obi-Wan, who's a little bit, I don't say rigid, but a little bit more by the book. So it was cool to kind of match up, see how those relationships kind of like anybody else, like um, informed how the clones themselves, evolved as people. So trying to write that, that was one of the things I took in consideration. But one of the points, I think, what some of the greatest clone episodes, and what I try to capture, are the stories that really make it a point to show the clones as people, as individuals, as more than just carbon copies of copies of copies. And the more you think about that, and the more you recognize them as people, like, Boyle, even like an episode, a small episode where you have Boyle and Waxer together, the one where they're, oh man, what planet are they on? Ryloth. Or are they on Ryloth? Is
I
that,
think
am I
so.
getting, yeah, I think so. And then, yeah, they find the small
Hmm.
girl, and they both have totally different views of like what they should do with this kid, and that's just showing how unique they are as people. And that's something I really want to capture. It wasn't always easy because you don't have D. Bradley Baker, which would be, really helpful. um, but putting them into situations that it was the trick, putting them in situations that allowed their unique characters to come through, and show who these clones really are.
I had never thought of it like that, that kind of nature versus nurture, and how the clones start to reflect their Jedi parents, so to speak. That's a
Yeah.
really, really interesting point. Do you have a favorite clone?
Oh yeah, definitely Rex.
Yeah.
For sure. um, I've heard. It's funny, since I started this. I posted like 2 weeks ago. I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised. I posted this thing of Wolf, showing that the Wolf and the Wolf Pack were in it, and people lost their minds. And I was like, I didn't know Wolf was that popular. Like,
That's
but he is. I
funny,
thought
yeah.
I thought we all yeah, I
Uh,
thought we all agreed Rex was the best.
well, the Wolf Pack is probably my favorite group of clones. Like in Battlefront 2, that's I got all my skins based after the Wolf Pack, but uh, Echo is probably my favorite at this point. I've always been kind of a fives guy, but with everything going on in the Clone Wars right now, I'm really into Echo. But
Yeah, no kidding.
it is funny how, like, again, just that all of these clones have unique personalities, and they're the same person, or they should be, but we all have a different favorite. I think that's so
Yeah, no
funny.
kidding. Yeah. Oh no, it's wild, and it's just like a testament to how powerful that series, the animated series, is. Like they did so much to create this world, and create these clones and bring them into their own. That's just I was been rewatching it. Not so much now. I'm watching the new episodes, but when I was writing the scripts and I was rewatching it for like the umpteenth time and really watching it with a different lens, I was like, man, just what they do in this show is remarkable.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite arc?
Oh yeah, the Krell
Oh yeah,
is
yeah.
my
Umbara.
favorite. So dark.
Yeah,
Yeah, Umpire. Yeah.
that's a favorite of
it's
a lot of fans.
yeah, it's funny because I watch it. I almost watched it. I started watching it once. I hadn't watched it in a while, and this is a bit ago. I started watching with my kids who are younger. I think they were like 7 and 4 at the time, and I had to turn it off. I was like, man, I forgot how many clones bite it in this in this episode or this arc. But how about you? Do you have a favorite as well?
Probably the Lawless arc with Maul teaming up with Pre-Vizsla, all that. Like that's got some of my favorite stuff in it. But Umbara is probably a close second.
That's a good one too. That's a real good one. Yeah.
But I mean, kind of same thing. And this is true of so much of Star Wars, and especially the animated series, is that they start for a younger audience and then kind of grow up with the audience. So yeah, if you if you're like binge watching with a 7-year old, it like quickly gets out of hand.
Yeah, it totally does. And that's a great point, 'cause it does. Like that first season is pretty light and pretty, and not in a bad way, but really light, really fun, and breezes by. And then once you get going, it takes you to some, I don't want to say just dark, but a lot more complex
Yeah.
places.
Well, that's something I wanted to ask you about actually, because Star Wars Adventures, the series, is much more targeted at a younger audience. I think I've definitely seen some people show some resistance into getting into the content that is for younger people. So, what would you tell my older viewers to encourage them to give Star Wars Adventures and specifically Clone Wars Battle Tales a shot?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I see a lot as well. And you're totally that's a I mean, it's a totally accurate observation. Yeah, it's something that kind of bums me out,
I agree.
because I yeah, I mean, I read those stories. First of all, Star Wars is for kids, like just fundamentally. That's what Lucas envisioned. I mean, I know it's evolved so much in the last 40 plus years, so it's hard to say that anymore. But it's you can be the thing that I think, and I write for younger readers with different stuff as well. And I think that you can do the same thing in all ages content that you do in content that's for more mature audiences. I mean, not too mature. We're not talking like, something like the film Parasite. But like, but like for more, there's that cross section of like kid maturity and like beyond kid. That's not just kid stuff. Like a Pixar almost, a little evolved from that. And the thing is like it's the same basic Star Wars essence that's happening there. Like what you find in Adventures isn't antithetical to anything that we know and love in Star Wars. It's the same themes, it's the same messages, it's the same characters. It's just put in a different way. I mean, it's more that I think if you watched, or if, I'm sorry, if you read, let's say, for example, the Marvel Star Wars, you would find a series that is led by story. It is plot to plot to plot, one big continuous story, and story is what's really driving that series. Star Wars Adventures is different. When you're writing for kids, you're more driven by characters and themes. You really want to have a good point. And I think that's something that kids really value. And that point, again, is going to be something that's evergreen to Star Wars that we all know, we all love. And it's going to be seeing the characters that we love. It's less about creating something, some sort of new story. It's not, the agenda isn't to fill in gaps between one signpost to another, Jedi to this, or, New Hope to Empire. It's not really, that's not the point. The point is character and themes and getting that, Star Wars essence in there. And when it comes specifically Clone Wars, it's that. But my main goal, like one of the main things I wanted to do is I wanted to capture the feel of how the animated series, at least how it feels to me. I want it to be like these comics can be adapted into an episode and it would work, because it's a cartoon, so it is sort of skewing already to that younger audience. Even when it gets darker and more complex, it's still kind of more in that closer to kids than like Mandalorian is. Um, so, I mean, I don't think if they ever will be adapted into animated shows, but that was my whole thing. So, if you're somebody who loves the animated series, as so many of us do, but are hesitant because this series falls under the rubric of Star Wars Adventures, which is ostensibly more for kids, I think that you'll find that you're picking up something that you recognize as belonging in that Clone Wars canon, and I think readers will be satisfied with what's there.
I have talked about Star Wars Adventures and likened them to Clone Wars episodes before because you're absolutely right where it has this very clear, like you might as well be able to pick out the fortune cookie written for each little issue or each story, the two stories in each issue. Uh, and I was going to bring up that you recently wrote for Ray, and that issue came out I think yesterday from when we were recording this. And I really liked the scene where she and Poe are flying together. This is her first time in an X-wing cockpit, but she's like, "I know these ships backwards and forwards," and he tells her, "Well, it's different to know something and experience it." And I really like that uh, discussion of the difference
Oh,
between
but
knowledge and wisdom, where
oh,
like that immediately jumped out at me, and I thought that was a great lesson, that just because you've read something doesn't mean you're all of a sudden an expert. But I wanted to ask if you have like a favorite lesson from the Clone Wars or Star Wars or any of the comics that you've written.
Let's see. That's a really good question. Let's see. I'll start. I mean, with the comics that I've written, I really liked. Oh gosh, what I think it was 27, 28, 29. The ones that like tied into the Rise of Skywalker.
Is that the
I
droids one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. I should give context. Yeah, it's droids, and they're kind of. I love the idea of it's 3PO, um, BB-8 and R2D2, and they meet a young girl who's I'm gonna butcher this. Can you help me out? How do you pronounce that species?
Oh,
That's Nemo.
Nemoidian?
Or is that how you say it? Nemoidian?
Is that what she
Okay, I
was?
was gonna say. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I
I was
never
always gonna say.
think like she definitely, now that I'm thinking of it, looks like one. I just don't remember ever seeing a young one before.
Yeah.
But
Well,
like
there
the
we go.
that's funny.
I was gonna say like Nemoidian. I was like, yeah, but Nemoidian, yeah, I'm certain you're correct. You're the expert, actually. um, but I always love stories of like anybody can contribute. Anybody can find a role and find value and have an important part to play, even when especially when people tell you that you can't, and that's what happens. Poe is kind of dismissing 3PO, at the beginning of the story and saying, oh, you're just droids, we're going off to the important thing. And then it turns out that, 3PO and the rest get into this adventure and end up doing a very important thing. And at the end, you see spoiler, but you see 3PO kind of assert, that idea that like anybody can be part of this, anybody can contribute, however big, however small. And I always love stories like that. I always love stories. They're so reaffirming that um, I'm a strong believer in unity. I believe that we're better together. So I love the idea of like letting especially young audiences know that like you don't have to be Ray, you don't have to be Luke, you can be 3PO or you can be whomever and still play a really important role in making things better. Um, and just for Star Wars in general, I think that pulls into again that unity idea. I love found families. I love a group of on paper people who shouldn't work together, who shouldn't function together, come together and work, form a family, form a unit, and are able to by not looking at their differences, but using their differences to create something better than themselves individually. Um, do something remarkable, and Star Wars does that so well. I mean, it always bringing together, these characters, Han and Luke and Leia and Poe and Rose and Finn and Ray, and they're all so different, and they all manage to do great things when united, and I just love that.
Yeah, I think that that's something I've been recognizing more and more, especially when it comes to the bad guys, like the Sith and the Empire and the First Order, and literally everyone on the dark side. They're selfish. They're always out for themselves, and they are unable to work together. They're constantly fighting with each other, and that's why they will ultimately never win, because the people that have they're fighting for something outside of themselves. And yeah, that's something Star Wars does over and over and over. Uh,
Yeah, totally.
was there ever like an episode of the Clone Wars that you like grabbed your kids and were like, "Pay attention to this one. This one's really important."
um, I don't know about Clone. I'm trying to think anywhere in Clone Wars. I know in Rebels, there was a couple of times that really really comes out. Um, I'm trying to think of some good Rebels episodes, and of course, it's gonna escape me. But Rebels had more of that ragtag, different people coming together feel, where because Clone Wars is more like, we're the military, we're the Jedi and the clones. It's like there was less of that mismatchedness, if that's a word, happening. But if you're looking for that, broadly speaking, Rebels had that in spades for sure.
Yeah. So you've also written another series for Star Wars Adventures. You did the Flight of the Falcon, the comic side of that. Um, what was the process for creating that like? Because it bounces back between comics and books. So you got to work with different authors, I assume.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty, I mean, it was fun. It was cool. It was weird though because like I only knew, like I hadn't read those books, and the authors and I didn't talk. Although I don't know, I talked to Lou a little bit, Lou Anders. I don't, I've never really talked to Justina Ireland. I love her stuff and she seems awesome. But we've never really interacted. So I was the last to that party. They had the books already going, and they wanted to have the comic component to it. So they brought me in like kind of later, which makes sense. It takes less time to do a comic, especially we're doing just they're shorter too. Um, so what was brought to me was like the stuff from Lucasfilm, and they were like, okay, you know, tell stories involving the Millennium Falcon, where the Falcon's the character, not necessarily who's piloting it, and between anywhere between like after Solo to right like 10 minutes after the Last Jedi. So it's pretty broad, and I got to pitch, 5 stories for 5 different issues in that. And it's funny, I'll never forget. Like I always treat Star Wars as like whenever I get a job with Star Wars, I'm always like, well, this is the last one. This is it. This is this is the last time I'm gonna do it. Especially when it was the first one, I was like, okay, this is the only time I'm gonna write Star Wars. So I'm gonna thoroughly tell like the Star Wars stories that I really want to tell. And they were like Agent Callus and Embo. Um, and another Nemoidian, because I love the prequels so much. And it was just all these weird, like not so much obscure, but certainly not A-list, characters that I was kind of pulling out. And everything I sent got approved. And I remember seeing some people from the story group like weeks or months later and saying like, "Hey, it's such a great to work with you. This is awesome. Thank you so much." And they were like, "Oh God," they're like, "We loved your pitches. No one pitches us stuff like that." So, so that's my niche. I think is like pulling the weird corners of the Star Wars universe. There's even some like legend stuff that I've referred to in there
Uh-huh.
um, that stuff no one else is really bothered to talk about. I'm the only weirdo who's like, "What's Embo up to?"
Well, I was going to ask later because I just like to ask people this. Like, my favorite Star Wars character is Big Starklighter, and I love hearing about people's favorite like minor characters. So it sounds like you probably have maybe even more than one. But who do you love in Star Wars that isn't an A-lister, maybe even a Z-lister that you think deserves more screen or page time?
Ooh, that's a great question. There's so many. I mean, it would definitely okay. So we have to narrow it down for sure to the Clone Wars era. And I've gotten to do some with the clones. I feel like even though clones have gotten some good time. Praise Vizsla would be cool. Gar Saxon would be. I'd
Mm.
love to do some of that, even though that's I'm assuming totally off limits. um, but like, I would love to dig into that, like what was going on Mandalore. Even before like the siege. It's such a fascinating, weird, like pacifist. Yet they have these, warrior class that is kind of existing independently. I would love to just like explore that world of Mandalore, circa early Clone Wars era, or even before that. Um, Either that or again like Embo. I really love Embo. I know he doesn't even speak basic, but I'd find a way to make that work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fingers crossed, Gar Saxon might show up in the last few episodes of the last season of the Clone Wars. I know he was in the Darth Maul comic that takes place in between seasons 5 and 7, so he might be around.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I've always wondered that. I've kind of I know we're gonna get a lot of heavy Mandalore stuff soon, but Yeah, I kind of wonder that. I just I don't know. There's something about that character is so pretty awesome, and there's a lot more that you can do with them.
Yeah, I've been really hoping that we see like some flashbacks in The Mandalorian where maybe we see live action versions of Bo Katan played by Katie Sackhoff and Gar Saxon, I think was Ray uh, Stevenson, I want to say. But like have the voice actors just play the characters. I think that'd be so cool.
Oh yeah, especially with Katie Sackhoff,
Yeah.
that would, as Bo, that would be, oh man, that would be awesome. So perfect.
Well, when we were talking about Flight of the Falcon and you got to write for all these different eras, are there challenges that are unique to each era, or do you have a favorite one to write for?
Well, I'm definitely a prequel guy. Which is funny because I'm actually like, I feel like like not that this matters too much, but I feel like people younger than me are more into the prequels because that's what they grew up on. I grew up
Hmm.
on the original trilogy. I didn't grow up on. I mean, I was, well, I was 19 when Phantom Menace came out. Um, so they're still been with me for a long time, long as anybody else, right? But yeah, I'm more of a prequel guy, just because I love that world. I just love the aesthetic. I love that big tragic story. There's so much I can go on of loving the prequels and everything that's going on. Um, I think I find that the easiest to write in because I feel like there's so much wide open space. Like if you go to like the if you go to like the original trilogy, the problem there that you encounter is that like so much has been done.
Mm.
Like there's a lot of material, and we're not even talking like legends. We're just talking like in the last five
Yeah,
years.
you're absolutely right.
Like there's a yeah, right. Well, if you look at the books, and you and I are I'm sure the same. We read pretty much everything. So if you want to include novels, now you got Mandalorian comics. Those movies. Like I don't know what we haven't talked about yet. um, and the sequel trilogy is tough too because like until Rise of Skywalker came out, like the sequel trilogy like between like Force Awakens and Last Jedi is like 8 days.
Right.
So that's like a challenge like in itself. So prequels like okay, this is like years and years. I don't know how. I mean, Anakin's like whatever 8 in the first, I forget, and then we go all the way up to him being basically an adult. So despite there being the Clone Wars and however many episodes there are, but that's only between 2 and 3. There's not a ton of books. There's a few comics. There's a lot of space and there's a lot of just stuff going on, just in that world that makes it pretty easy to kind of find crevices to sneak into, as a storyteller. But like I just not only is it for me easiest, I probably view it as the easiest, but I just because I love the prequel so much, I love that era so much.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That I hope that they start to explore that prequel era even more, and maybe with the High Republic starting to flesh out that old past, like I think there's a lot of room to even expand the prequel era. Um, did you immediately love the prequels when you saw them when you were 19?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's funny. I wasn't really on. I know like there was like very early internet as especially as the prequels went on to 2 and 3. I wasn't really on it that much, so it wasn't until later that I realized that everyone was real mad. um, so I saw Phantom Menace. I remember I saw it the midnight showing, the first showing there was. It was me, my brother and I, who's also my older brother, who's a huge Star Wars fan as well, and being like, that was awesome. That was great, like, and, I think I've come to appreciate them even more. I remember seeing when Force Awakens came out, I did the whole marathon, the theatrical marathon of, 1 through then 7. And I saw Phantom Menace on the big screen for the first time since 99. And I was like, this is gorgeous on the big screen. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing. It's such a cinematic experience that's just unrivaled. And so yeah, I've always been with the prequels. I think Attack of the Clones was the one that at first kind of confused me, and it still confuses me a little bit. Just in the sense of like what is going on in this movie. But um I mean, Revenge of the Sith was always one of my favorites. When I walked out of that movie, I was like, well, that was the best Star Wars ever. And I'm still, you know, Empire is probably the best, but Sith isn't far behind in my book.
Yeah, I mean I feel pretty much the same way. I feel grateful that I was just the age that I was when I saw them. Like I was 12 when Phantom Menace came out, and I walked out of that with that same feeling. Like that's the best thing I've ever seen in my life. And like there wasn't any. I remember reading newspaper reviews and being like, "Well, what do they know?" But
Right.
uh,
Well, I'm glad to know. It's funny, man. I don't know if you've caught this same vibe, but like I feel like in the last 2 years, I feel like the tables have started to turn, maybe even just a year or so. But have you felt like the tables started to turn where people are like, you know what? The prequels aren't so bad.
oh, for sure. Uh,
Okay, good.
like I think that it was really when the sequel trilogy was ramping up and just interest in Star Wars was coming out. And this is like I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I've likened Star Wars to like James Bond, where it's like whatever you saw first, I think you tend to love the most. So
Yeah.
now we're really hitting that time where the people who were kids that grew up with the prequels and that was their first Star Wars, like that's what Star Wars is to them, and so now they're out in force online to celebrate it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That I think you're totally right. And I think that like as for and we don't have to talk about this because goodness, but as like the sequel era has been wrought with its own controversy and stuff, people are like rose-colored glasses looking back, be like, you know what, those prequels weren't so bad. Um,
It's always like,
it's
yeah,
almost
I
like a
mean,
call.
there were flaws in all of the movies, and it's like none of them are perfect. It's just that they speak to us, and uh, that's I love the universe where it's like even if there's a book or something where I'm like, well, that wasn't really for me. It's like I can just set that aside and be like, the next book will probably be great, and like that's just I kind of pick and choose what my favorites are, but like I'm never gonna be mad to read a Star Wars story.
No, I don't think there's ever been a Star Wars anything that like got me angry, which is
Yeah.
such a weird, it's a weird idea.
um.
you know,
Yeah. So since we're talking about fandoms, what have you seen? What's the difference between writing for Star Wars and writing for something like DC or any of the other universes that you've had the opportunity to write for?
yeah. Well, the big thing to me, is really like what it comes down to is the personal investment. I can talk about like the differences like Batman. There's really no time doesn't exist in Batman's world. Like it just nobody ages, nobody gets older. Some people flirt with that idea, but Batman's kind of the same he was in 1972. So there's that, but like really, it's the personal investment. When I look back, this is so important to me, and I hope I've made it clear to people, anybody who's reading what I do. Like first and foremost, like I am a huge fan. I have the rebel tattoo to prove it, and I love Star Wars. There's nothing else. There's no story that I love more than the Star Wars story. And when I write it, I'm writing it partially as a fan and in the sense that like it's so important to me get it right. There's nothing that I don't feel the same stakes. Don't get me wrong. Like, and I'm not trying to diminish writing Flash or writing Nightwing or anything like that. I love those things, and I'm so grateful to have done that. But it's different. Like I like and love those things, but it's not the way I love Star Wars. And I know that feeling, that like deeply profound and personal feeling that exists in me, exists in so many other people, and that's a feeling that I want to put into my work because I know how important it is. And I just want to make sure that everything I do doesn't feel, I don't want it to be like a copy of something. It still has to be richly rewarding in its own way, and it has to be unique. But at the end of the day, like the core of whatever I do in Star Wars has to be capturing what Star Wars is. And that makes it a lot different. It makes the stakes a lot higher, I guess, for when I sit down and write. I thoroughly love doing it. I love doing it. But it's definitely a different feeling. I enjoy it more because of that, as well as much it makes like it a little bit more challenging. But I just want to make sure that I'm doing justice, I guess you can say, for by Star Wars and giving us all what we expect of these stories.
I think that's a beautiful way to end. I was I did have one more question, but
Sure.
that's such a I wanted to know if you could write any Star Wars comic, what would it be? But that was very well put. I really liked that.
Oh, it's funny. I'm actually writing it. It was actually the Clone Wars. This is actually not that I'm boasting, but it was my idea that I went to Lucasfilm
Oh,
with. So this is my baby, and it's been awesome.
well, that's great. I mean, like, I was excited to read this, but talking with you has made me even more excited, knowing, like, yeah, how much you love the prequel era, and now knowing that it was even your idea, that's fantastic. So, the first issue comes out on April 1st, and they're coming out every Wednesday in April. I
Hmm.
will put a link to like its Comixology and the IDW site in the description of this video. And where else can people find you if you want to plug anything else or say anything else about Battle Tales?
Um, yeah, people can find me just at Twitter and Instagram at Michael Moreci. And about Battle Tales, you know what? Um, this is how I'll hook people in. Is that there is a new clone that we're going to see. There's a new
Oh,
clone, issue 4, and it's my favorite issue. To be honest, I'm not making a judgment on art. So if any artists are listening, it's nothing to do with that. My favorite script, and it's a new clone named Heater and his story as a clone deserter, and I'm really pleased with that one. So if nothing else, get it because maybe it'll be worth something one day.
well, here's like I was over here thinking like you wouldn't be able to give us details like that, like if you'd created new characters. But there you go, your own clone. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
maybe I can't. Too late now.
Well, I'll bleep it out if I need to.
Nah, it's fine.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. This was awesome.
Oh no, I mean all things here. I'm really I watch a show. I love it. I'm always kind of I think I've told you this before. I'm always referencing it. I'm like, what is that thing? And I'll look up the video to be honest. And like you've helped me out a number of times. So this is pleasure's all mine.
Oh, well, thanks. If you ever need any questions answered quickly, shoot me a DM, and I'll do my best.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone, check out Star Wars Adventures: Clone Wars Battle Tales this April. Thank you guys for watching, and may the Force be with you.